person for English. So,
Right.
yeah. But they also lost some stuff in the translation of the translation.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's just like the Bible's been, what was it, in Greek and Latin it was written?
yeah, so if you look at Matthew, Mark, and John, all those were written in ancient Hebrew.
Okay.
And then Luke was written in ancient Greek.
Right.
Neither one are the language that Jesus, peace be upon him, spoke.
Aramaic.
Yeah, Aramaic. So you get translation first. If you're even talking about the original, you get translation, and then every, if you look at like every
generation of
you
translation and updating and
yes.
changes.
Yeah, so, if you had the original to go back to, you could say, okay, yeah, here's a mistake, or here's this, but there's no original to go back to. So that becomes an issue, and that's what I try to explain to people is, like, if I take a book in English and translate it into French, and then I destroy the English book, and then take the French translation and translate it back into English, it's not the same thing.
No, and because there's some words, as you know, in Arabic that just don't exist in English.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same thing in Kurdish.
Yeah, and Arabic is such a broad language. One word, depending on how you use it, can have thousands of meanings. And you could have thousands of words for one thing.
Okay.
They're just kind of like subtleties of that thing. Like there's 600 words in Arabic for sword. But it's not talking about the same kind of sword. It's always a little subtle difference
Right.
there. So it's such a broad language that, with one word you can describe so many different things. And then that one word can specify exactly what you mean as well. So either way you want to do it.
So depending on who's interpreting it, it's going to change context.
Yeah, and this, from an English or from language standpoint, anytime you're going to have a translation, you're always going to have the bias of the person translating it.
Right.
And anyone who says they're not biased doesn't know what the word means, or they're lying.
To your point, my sister-in-law, my ex-wife's sister,
Yes.
Of course, Muslim and from Kurdish.
Yes.
She comes to the States. When she came, she goes, "Why are there so many churches everywhere?" It's like, it's like we don't think about it growing up here because you don't really think about why there are so many different churches,
Yeah.
And the different interpretations. But it's like what you're saying, they take the same book and they interpret it different ways and different meanings. And so over there, I've been to Iraq, I've been to Kurdistan, I've been to Baghdad. It's like, there's one big mosque for everybody in the community to come to.
Yeah, but even there, Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Jews were split up into 71 ideologies. The Christians into 72. And he's not talking about sects. He's talking about ideologies.
Okay.
Because if you look at sect-wise, if you look at Presbyterians, Baptists, and Methodists, it's pretty much the same ideology.
Yeah.
It's just one drinks, one doesn't drink. And one's rich and one's not.
Right.
Yeah, it's like one of my high school physics teacher. He was Presbyterian, and he used to say, he says, what's a Methodist? He says a Methodist is a Baptist who drinks but doesn't have enough money to be a Presbyterian.
Well, we used to say Episcopalians were lazy Catholics.
Yeah. So the ideology is the same. It's just labeling are different. So that's what he's talking about. But he said that the Muslims will be split up into 73 ideologies, of which only one will be accurate. So you have all these other ideologies that are floating around, and you see that, with the Wahhabi movements and all these other movements that have split off. And that's what he's talking about. And this is part of what we've been talking about here. And I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala So, he used to live in Washington State.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
he
From there?
lived in Seattle.
I lived down the east side for like 2 years.
On the east side of the state?
Like east of like Washington, like Redmond, Bellevue.
Oh, yeah, I know where Bellevue is, yeah. I was in Gig Harbor.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful place.
So there, as far as like the ideologies, Prophet ﷺ also, he said to Ali, radiallahu anhu, his cousin and son-in-law, that as I have struggled for the revelation of this Quran. You will struggle for the correct interpretation against the false and forced misrepresentation. And so you have plenty of that, because unfortunately, human nature, I won't say human nature, a lot of people's nature is to go with whatever's easiest. And if I can justify it somehow, that's even better. And so that's what you get. Is a lot of people kind of to justify whatever they're doing at the expense of the religion. And so, and this is, what we've done lately, the last few weeks, we've been talking about, the household of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the lineage, and their, their sacrifices to uphold the purity of the religion. And so, so we have what we call Ahl al-Bayt. Ahl al-Bayt means, the household of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So this is his lineage through his daughter, Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha. So through her, so you have the main two sons, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and then from Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you have this lineage. And today we'll be talking somewhat about Imam Ali Naqi, so his lineage is, Ali Naqi is the son of Imam Muhammad Taqi, who's the son of Imam Ali Rida, who's the son of Imam Musa Qadim, who's the son of Imam Ja'far Sadiq, who's the son of Imam Muhammad Baqir, who is the son of Imam Zain al-Abidin, who's the son of Imam Hussein al-Islam, who's the son of Ali Rida, and he's the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was born around the year 214 Hijri. So 214 years after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina, or the immigration of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina, is the birth of Imam Ali Naqi. And Naqi means one who purifies. So this is one of his titles. Another one of his titles is Hadi, which means one who guides. And so, as we spoke about last week when we were talking about his father, so his father was eventually poisoned by the king, Mu'tasim Billah. And at that time, Imam Ali Naqi is roughly about 6 years old. So the year 220 Hijri is when his father is martyred. And about 2 years before the martyrdom, before he's poisoned, he actually left Medina, was called by the king to Baghdad. He went there and was basically imprisoned there before being poisoned. And so Imam Ali Naqi, who was born in Medina Munawwara, he only spent roughly about 4 years with his father. But, as we've talked about every week since we've been talking about this subject, when Imam Zain al-Abidin was brought from Karbala to Damascus, and when he basically, gives this khutbah, or this talk or lecture in front of them, he states there, he says that Ahlul Bayt, the household of the Prophet ﷺ, have been gifted with 6 characteristics. First of which is knowledge. And that knowledge is not simply limited to what we see, but also what we don't see, and all forms of knowledge. You have like book knowledge, you have verbal knowledge, you have spiritual knowledge. All those knowledges they're gifted with. And then hilm, which means forbearance, which includes patience. So when difficulties come, they stand firm, and they don't compromise in their values and in their ethics and their morals. And we see this, this is throughout history, and it's very prevalent and obvious even today. Something bad happens to somebody, and all their morals and ethics go out the door. Everything that they claimed to be standing for before, that's gone. And now, whatever, and then they turn around and justify whatever they're doing. And most of them, again, they try to use religion to justify all the atrocities and everything else that they're committing. So, this is just blatantly obvious, for anyone who wants to see. But these are people who have forbearance, who are gifted with this, so that when, people abuse them and and atrocities come their way, they do not compromise in their morals, their ethics, and you don't see, and these are people who, even when times are tough, are very generous, and when times are good, they're even more generous. But their generosity, so that's the other characteristic, is their generosity. It never ends. So those are three. And then eloquence. These are people who are very, when they speak very clearly, and the words that they use, just so many different meanings, and can be applied in so many different ways. And the example, one point of eloquence that I gave earlier was, a few weeks ago, was that one time the Prophet ﷺ, he asked the companions, he says, what's the most common letter in the Arabic language? And everybody said alif. So if you look at Arabic, if you look at anything, the sound so prevalent in every language actually, but in Arabic even more so, because you have al coming before so many different words, and depending on how you're using it. And so right then and there, Ali, he stands up and he gives this whole khutbah, this whole talk, and which fits on a page, not a single alif in that whole talk. And just the mastery of the language, and not just Arabic, and we'll go over that in a little while. But also, like when Imam Musa Kadhim, when he was asked, or when Bahlul comes to him and says that the king, which was Harun Rashid at that time, is planning to come and kill you and your followers. So all he said was Jim. He just mentions one letter. He says Jim. So some of them took that to mean Jila Watan. Jila Watan means to be exiled from your land. So they went into different lands. Some of them took that to mean Jabal, which means mountain. So they ran off into the mountains. And Bahlul took that to mean Junoon, which means crazy. So he just started acting like he's crazy. And the king left him alone. Crazy man. So that, just with one letter, he expressed so many different meanings to all of his students. And depending on their level and their understanding, they all applied those meanings. So again, eloquence, courage. And we see this, like with Sayyidina Ali Karamallah wajh. He goes into battle, and one is when he would wear armor, there was no armor on his back. It was just on the front. And when he was asked why, he said, because I'm not going to give any moment for the enemy to see my back. And he would go into battle, and they asked him one time, they said, aren't you afraid of death? And he said, why should I fear my greatest protector? He says, because death will come to me at a specific time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen. Not before then and not after then. So, so if it's not my time to die, death can't come. So why should I fear something that can't come until it's its time? We see this with Imam Hussein al-Islam when he's standing, with literally less than 100 people standing against an army of 22,000. Not yielding in the least, not compromising, his values and his morals at all. Knowing what's coming, but very calm. And these are people, when you listen to them, when they speak, there is never a complaint. Like these days, something happens and we're complaining, oh God, why me? Never a complaint against Allah. These are people who are truly pleased with whatever pleases their Lord. So courage, and then the last one was love in the hearts of the people for them, or the love in the hearts of the believers for them. So this is something that is natural. This is something that is natural for a believer, that they automatically love this household. And just listening about them, talking about them, is something that just soothes the heart, for the believers. And so, and this is again, like we've talked about before, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says to Ali that only a believer will love you and only a hypocrite will have animosity against you. So when you see somebody who has an issue with Ali, then you know what position he stands in. And when you see those who truly love him, and this we have to keep iterating, unfortunately, is when I love somebody, then I also love the ones that they loved. So if I love Ali then I'm not going to be cursing the other companions of the Prophet like Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman, because if you look at the interactions between him and these companions, there's nothing but love and respect. So because you have plenty of people these days who claim to love him and yet they're cursing the ones that he loved, and that and then you also have people who claim to love him, but then they find faults with his with those who followed him, which also doesn't fit. So love is an interesting thing because it's an extreme emotion, and Islamically, the definition of the true definition or the essence of Iman is the love of Allah and His messengers. That is Iman. That is faith. And then that love becomes the guide for those. Unfortunately, these days in this narcissistic world, no one knows how to love anymore. It's all about me. It's which is not love. And this is also why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that you are that no one is a true believer unless he loves me more than he loves himself. So again, when Imam Ali Naqi is 4, his father is called away. When he's 6, his father is martyred, poisoned. So he's in Medina, and everybody now is wondering, those who are close to the family, who is going to teach him? His father has already passed away. If you remember, his grandfather passed away when his father was 8. And yet at the age of 10, his father is debating with the Chief Justice of the state. And the Chief Justice has no response. He asks a question, he responded to the question, basically he said that the question is not complete. And then he completes the question himself. At this 10-year-old young boy, completes the question, and now the Chief Justice has no answer for this. So the same way, with Imam Ali Naqi, they sought a scholar whose name was Ubaydullah Junadi, who was considered one of the best scholars of his time. And he starts teaching him, so to say, and so after a few days, the people asked him. He said, "How is he learning? Is he doing well?" So he says, "Honestly, I'm not teaching him anything. He's teaching me. I open up a subject, and he goes ahead and goes to the completion of that before I even get anywhere." Again, see, everything is the favor of Allah. But you have, as far as two broad categories, you have what's known as Fadl Jazai, which is the favor of Allah in a response to something. So I do something, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards me with this. I put in my effort, I'm studying, so I learned. I make my prayers, I do all of these things, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards me in various ways. Okay? This is known as Fadl Jazai, which is Allah gives, in lieu of something that I've done. And this is, what most people talk about and what we all strive for as well. But there's another favor which is called Fazl Ikhtisasi, which means that he does a favor just because he did the favor. And no one has the right to ask him why him and why not me, because, that's his decision. And so when we look at Ahlul Bayt, when we look at this household of the Prophet, these are the people who are Fazl Ikhtisasi. Allah has given to them, irregardless of whether they have, put in any effort on that end or not, because this is just who they are. And we have no right to ask, okay, why them? Because if you look at the background, and I'm going to get to this point as well, when you look at the background of Satan, of Shaitan, how he became Satan was because he had this question. Why him, why Adam, and not me? And so we'll get to that. You get it. So now, so basically, it's very interesting because also even at a young age, he would speak to people in their native language. And when he's like 10 or 12 years old, there was a Turkic soldier that was passing by. And this is before there was Turkey. Turkey is Turkey because of the Turkic people emigrating. The Turkic people, of course, came from the steppe. They eventually also conquered India. So the goal was that. There's some issue going on here. So, Yusuf. So he addresses him by a name that no one knew. It was the name that his father used to call him by. So again, these are people that are gifted with this language, with this knowledge. One time he was speaking to, when he was older, he's speaking to a servant of his, and he's speaking to him in Hindi. And the servant says, I don't understand this language. So he picked up the stone, he licked the stone, he said, he gave it to him, he said, lick the stone. He licked the stone, and that servant now could speak 70 different languages. Again, these are gifts. And a lot of people deny these gifts because out of jealousy, it's okay, why them and why not me? Which is the wrong question to be asking. And the thing is, if we associate ourselves with them, if we make those connections with them, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also, because of those connections, give us gifts. So, and I'm going to, well, I won't digress yet. When Imam Ali Naqi, one time he was talking about Asif bin Barkhia. So if you remember in the Quran, in Surah Namal, So Surah number 27. So it's got the Roman numerals here, so I keep translating them. So Surah number 27, which is the ant. And it's called the ant because there's mention of Sulaiman alayhi salam, Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him. So if you remember, Sulaiman alayhi salam, he's given kingdom over all of Allah's creatures, whether they're men, jinn, animals, whatever, and he's given reign over them all. So Namal is the ant because as one of his armies is marching, this ant is telling the other ants to go into their holes because the army is coming in. Perhaps they won't realize and they'll trample us. He hears this from 3 miles away. It's not mentioned in the Quran, but we know from the narrations that this was like 3 miles away. He's listening to this ant speak. It's interesting because until recently, the scientists thought that ants only communicated through these pheromones, through these chemicals. Recently they found, and research was done in Italy, that they also communicate through sound. Because there is a moth whose larvae will mimic certain sounds that the ants make, and those ants will take that larvae and nurture it in their den, or in their holes, and then that becomes a moth later on and flies away. But it's mimicking their sounds, and that the ants are nurturing it. So this is how they realize they also communicate through sound. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this in the Quran because Sulaiman alayhi salam heard the ant. Of course, I can't even hear an ant if it's in my ear. So, but not only did he hear the ant, he understood what the ant was saying. Because again, he's given this kingdom over all. So if he's given kingdom over all, he also has to be able to understand everyone. So, but the point I wanted to come to is in this surah also what's mentioned is the hudhud, which was, I guess, they translate that as it's a bird. And this bird was one of the soldiers in the army of Sulaiman alayhi salam. And what happens is that the bird is late, because they had roll call every morning and they had to line up and everybody was in order, and it's late that day. And so Sulaiman alayhi salam says that if it doesn't give me a good excuse, then I will execute it. Why did not obey the order and come on time? So when it arrives, it tells Sulaiman alayhi salam, he says, I was delayed because I flew over a land and I saw these people worshiping, the sun, and this queen who's their leader, and this huge throne, and describes this kingdom. And the kingdom is the kingdom of Sheba, which of course, there's debate, but most people now think that this was probably part of Yemen. Some people think that it was part of Abyssinia, which today is Somalia, in that area, but they also now realize that actually was one kingdom, which is why the cultures are mixed. So what happens is that, so when it comes and it tells him this, so Sulaiman alayhi salam writes a letter to the queen. He says, look, either you come and meet me or I will come and meet you. And so she holds counsel with the kings, or with her advisors, and they say, look, when kings enter a land, they cause utter destruction. So it's better that we go and meet him. Okay. And so she starts her procession on the way. In the meantime, here, Sulaiman alayhi salam, once they leave, once she leaves her kingdom, Sulaiman alayhi salam is having his court, meeting his advisors, which includes jinn and men and other animals, and everything is in that court. And so he asked the question, because her throne is supposed to be so huge. He says, who can bring her throne to me before she arrives? And so if you start from verse number 38 in this surah, then you'll see this. So one of the jinns, and not just any jinn. So in the Quran here, قَالَ إِفْرِيدٌ مِّنَ الْجِنِّ. So ifreed are not just any jinn. Ifreed are very powerful jinns. So within, just like within us, there are different races. You have different, peoples and different characteristics. So within the jinn, you have the same thing, which should not surprise us, because within all the other animals, you also see differences. And of course, in animals, you call them breeds. Within us, we have races, and the same thing with the jinn. So ifreed are these powerful, very huge, powerful jinn. And that jinn, he says that I will bring that throne to you before you dismiss your court. But then, verse 40, قال الذي عنده علم من الكتاب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and said one of them, one of the humans, one of the companions of Sulaiman alayhi salam, who had knowledge of the book, and they translate had knowledge of the book, but that's not really the accurate translation, because it doesn't say قال الذي عنده علم الكتاب. It says قال الذي عنده علم من الكتاب. So, and the difference there being, ilmul kitab would have meant he had knowledge of the book. Ilmul minal kitab means he had knowledge of part of the book. He had partial knowledge of the book. He says that I will bring it to you before your glance can move, before you blink. And Sulaiman alayhi salam looks over there, and suddenly that throne is there. It's there. The throne, and this is 1,000 miles away. If you look at the distance, if you look at where Sulaiman alayhi salam is in Jerusalem and where Sheba was in Yemen, that's at least 1,000 miles away. Right? So not even a blink of the eye, and the throne is there. Now, many interesting points here. One is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, He doesn't name that person. Because if He had given that person's name, then people could say, oh, this was specific for him. He doesn't give his name, He gives a characteristic of that person. And what is the characteristic? That he has knowledge of part of the book, which also is an indication that whoever has this knowledge, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow him to do similar things. Right. Another point here is the jinn. And of course, when we think of jinn, everybody thinks, oh, they have all this power, they do this, all this. Yet that jinn's power compared to the power of this man who has knowledge of part of the book was nothing. Another point that's not mentioned here is that and we know this through the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, that throne was too big to fit through the doors of the court of Sulaiman alayhi salam, and yet it's inside. This is part of why when she arrives, she has to take a double check. She looks at that, she said, it looks like my throne. How did my throne get here? So in reality, what he does is he deconstructs the throne there and reconstructs the throne here, which is teleportation. Now, another point here that's important to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sends His prophets, His messengers, but He sends them all with proof and authority. If He didn't send them with authority, then why is He sending them? I mean, this shouldn't be a difficult concept for people to understand, but there are people who, like somebody sent me a clip the other day that, oh, no one has any authority, not even any prophet or anybody, only Allah has authority. Well, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives someone authority, then for me to deny that authority is also disbelief. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given fire the authority to burn. Yet in the case of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he's thrown into the fire, Allah commands the fire to be cool and peace and serenity for him, so that fire didn't burn him. Yet if I go and I say, no, only Allah burns, I'm going to put my hand in the fire, well, I shouldn't be complaining when my hand gets burned. Because again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given authority to something. For me to deny that authority is also part of disbelief. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given authority to these messengers and these prophets to do these things, because when they came with proofs. And people would ask, oh, well, what's your proof? And they would do things that, that should not happen, which is what a miracle is. It's an impossibility that happens. Like we see with Musa alayhi salam. He hit the water with his staff, and it splits up. I mean, we can hit water with anything and nothing happens. again, this is proof. This is an impossibility that happens. This is part of his proof. However, you have, and in Arabic there's a different word for prophets, that miracles of the prophets. And actually there's even a different word for miracles of the prophets that they did before the declaration of prophethood. Okay, those are irhas. And the ones that they do after the declaration of prophethood is mu'jiza. But then the miracles that the followers of the prophets do, those are kiramat. So he also gives them, like Asif bin Barqiyah here. He's doing this miracle. But the interesting thing is that if you look at the miracles of the followers of a prophet, they will be in line with the miracles of that prophet. So like, common miracles for Sulaiman al-Islam, he would travel, move people from here to there, order the wind to take someone someplace, teleport somebody somewhere else, himself teleport to other parts of his kingdom. Take a look at the kingdom, he would travel the whole kingdom in half a day. Okay. So these are part of his miracles. Not his only miracles, but parts of his miracles, and these are miracles that stood out with him. So this miracle from Asif, his follower, is in line with his miracle. This is why when we look at the true followers of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are also given miracles. Those but see, miracles, unfortunately, like, there's a guy in Pakistan right now, doing these parlor tricks. And people think, oh, wow, parlor tricks, When you look at those who are given these gifts, it's not a show, and it's not whenever. They do them when they're needed. When there is and they also know, and this is part of forbearance, they also know when Allah wills for them not to do something. Example of this is like Imam Hussein al-Islam in Karbala. They stopped the water for 3 days. He could have hit the earth just like, his great-grandfather Ismail al-Islam, when he rubs his heels, Zamzam comes out, right? He could have hit the earth and water would have come. But that wasn't the time to do that. This was the time to show the people forbearance and patience. To be that example. This is why they go through these difficulties, but the same thing, again, they go through the difficulties and they never complain. They are patient, but they also know what is needed. The patience is, a lot of people think that patience is inaction, and it's not. They think forbearance is, being indifferent and not responsive, and that's not the case. You look at Imam Hussein al-Islam, when you have a king who's a tyrant, who is violating all of the rights of Allah and His Messenger, violating the rights of the people, he doesn't sit idly by and do nothing. He refuses to give him allegiance. He takes steps to show the people that standing up against these atrocities, against oppression, is part of the foundational aspects of Islam. And in the process, he sacrifices literally, other than one son, his whole family. Yeah. And even to the end, never complaining. So, again, here, there's so many lessons that we get from these, just like there are 3 or 4 verses here. And so this is why, when we see these things, they shouldn't surprise us. Of course, you have many fraudsters, and you will always have those. There's no shortage of people that try to show that there's something that they're not. And more so now, because it's easy to get a following, get a lot of likes and stuff on YouTube, and make a lot of money. And that, unfortunately, is what religion has become for most people. That's why on the dollar bill it says, "In God we trust," because that is the God of most people. Money, and it's not just here, globally. Yeah. So anyway, so here when Imam Ali Naqi AS is talking about this verse. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has divided, and he's talking about certain specific knowledges, into 73 categories, and Asif bin Barkhia was given one of those categories. And because of that one category, he was able to bring that throne from 1,000 miles away within, within a moment. Not even the blink of an eye. He says he was given one of those categories. He says, I have been gifted with all 73. And so, when he's speaking to different people in different languages, that shouldn't be a very, huge surprise. Abdullah ibn Zubair, radiallahu anhu, who was one of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's not even related by blood. When he was born, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took a date and chewed on it, softened it, and placed it in his mouth. It's what, this is tradition amongst the Muslims, that when a child is born, you take a date or honey or something sweet, you soften it up and you place it in their mouth so that they can experience the sweetness of this world. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this. He chewed it himself first, and then he placed it in his mouth. And because of that, he could speak 100 different languages. So he would be at home in India where there are more than 100 different languages. You go from one area to the next and you got another language. So these, like when we're specifically talking about Imam Ali Naqi, he lived during his lifetime, and he's eventually will be martyred and poisoned when he's 40. So those 40 years, he lived through 6 different kings, which is interesting. Is we look at like in India, Nizamuddin Awliya, rahmatullah alayhi, who was one of the great saints there. He lived through 9 different kings, would not meet a single one of them. All the kings wanted to come and see him because they knew that these are the people who control the people's hearts. These are the people that the people love. Everyone came to them, and it was interesting because these are people. It didn't matter what religion they were. If they had any difficulty, these are the people that they came to. Whether they were Hindu or Sikh or Muslim or Buddhist, that's where they went. So when they came, so all the kings wanted to get close to these people because it's like what rulers do today. They'll get certain scholars or certain people certain person that the people respect, and they try to connect themselves with that person, to use that as leverage over the people. Not because of any sincerity towards anything, just use it over as leverage. And so this is what these kings would do. And like one of the main kings during his time, he even wrote him a letter. He says, I'm coming. He says, you will enter the front door and I will leave the back door. I'm not meeting you. However, with Imam Ali Naqi, you have a different situation where he doesn't have the autonomy to get away. So when he's born, Mamun is the king. And then, Mamun dies a few years later. And then, actually, when he's 4, Mamun dies. Then Mu'tasim is the king. Mu'tasim is the one who poisoned his father. Mamun is the one who poisoned his grandfather. And then after Mu'tasim, then one of Mu'tasim's sons, Wathiq, becomes the king. And interesting point here is that there was a person who came from Baghdad to Medina Munawwara. He came to meet Imam Ali Naqi, and Ali Naqi, he asked him, he asked, how is the king, Wathiq? And he says, when I left, he was doing very good. He was fine. So he says, well, the people of Medina say that he died. And so and that person understood that when he's saying the people of Medina, he's talking about himself. So he says, and then he asked him, he says, what about Mutawakkil? Mutawakkil was Wathiq's brother, who Wathiq had imprisoned. Kings have their issues. And so he says to him, he says, well, he's in jail. he says to him, he says, well, you know, the people say that he's become the king now. And he asks, what about, he names the chief advisor to the previous king. He said, what about him? He said, oh, you know, the people, they love him and he has a lot of authority. He says, well, you know, well, the people say that, you know, he's fallen out of favor and will soon be dead. And so he asked him, he says, when did all this happen? He says, 6 days ago. And he later checked and found out, and exactly as he had said, all of this stuff had happened. Mutawakkil, when he becomes the king, Mutawakkil as far as Banu Abbas, so you have, you know, the Khilafah, which lasted for 30 years, and then you have the reign of Banu Umayyah. So Banu Umayyah, their reign lasted about, close to about 90 years, not quite 90 years. So 132 Hijri is when Banu Abbas become the kings. Of course, you have Yazid amongst Banu Umayyah, and here you have Mutawakkil. So Mutawakkil was known as the Yazid of Banu Abbas. Alcoholic, womanizer, you know, everything that was against Islam. That was him. And these people, they knew, even though when we look at, you know, like, when we look at the lives of these imams, they knew that if there was anyone who could overthrow them, these were the people. Even though they weren't active in politics per se. But, you know, when you're guiding the people, when you're giving the people the strength to stand up for what's right, you know, that becomes an issue for the rulers. You know, because the rulers control, you know, by oppressing people. And when the people, you know, they become firm in their beliefs, and then the help of Allah comes. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, He says that help Allah and Allah will help you and plant your feet firm. وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ, make you very firm. And so this steadfastness and firmness is what the leaders fear. So when you look at this again, so this is why all of these kings always had an issue with all of these imams, even though they're not directly advocating anything other than for the people to do what's right, to stand up for what's right, and not to oppress people, and to protect the people's rights. So Mutawakkil actually, he invites him. He invites him to a new town he had made, Samara. He invites Imam Ali Naqi. But when he invites him, and invites in quote here, you know, he sends 300 soldiers to accompany him there. And of course, you know, the people, when they're looking at this, oh, you know, look at the king. He's you know, he's giving him such honor. You know, he basically brings him to Samara, and there he knows, and Imam Ali, he knew what was going on. He arrives there, and he's basically under house arrest. And not only house arrest, the king would force him to come to his parties, where you have all of this indecency going on. You know, because he knew that this hurt him from a spiritual aspect. But the kings also don't understand who these people really are. So even when he would come, you'd have many people who were coming to these gatherings who, because of his presence there, you know, just the effect of his presence would change their outlook on things. You know, it's like when we talked about Imam Musa Qadim. we talked about Bishr Hafi. So Bishr Hafi was a drunkard. He was Muslim, but when you looked at him, he didn't reflect any aspect of Islam, right? But one day, he's walking in this drunken state, and he sees a piece of paper with the name of Allah written on it. And so, and it's on the ground, so he picks it up, he cleans it off, he puts some nice ither or perfume on it, and then puts it in a high place. So he sees in a dream that night where he hears, he's told in that dream that you honor the name of Allah, so we will honor you. And so the next day he has this party going on at his house. He has this slave girl who comes out to throw some stuff out, and Imam Musa Qadim, who's passing by. Imam Musa Qadim, of course, is the great-grandfather of Imam Ali Naqi. He's passing by, and he asks this girl, this woman, he says, is the owner of this house a free man or a slave? Because Bishr was a very wealthy man, but like wealth does to a lot of people, they don't know what to do with it, and so they get into all these. You look at all these millionaires from Hollywood. So many of them are involved in things that are very indecent. So again, too much money and no moral compass, things happen. And so, she, when she hears this question, she's kind of taken aback. What type of question is this? So she says, he's a free man. He says yes, because if he was a slave, he wouldn't be behaving like this. So she goes in and she tells Bishr, this man was passing by and he said this. Bishr, even in that state, understood what he meant. That if he was truly a slave of his Lord, he would not be behaving like this. So he comes running out barefooted, looking for the man who said this. Eventually catches up with Imam Musa Qadim, and becomes his disciple. And the reason he's known as Bishr Hafi, the barefooted bishop, is because he never wore shoes after that. And they asked him, why don't you wear shoes? And he said that this was the state I was in when guidance came to me. So this is a reminder to me of that moment. And also of staying away from everything that came before that. So early on I had alluded to, as I said, these are the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored with these gifts. But even for us, if we associate with them, if we connect ourselves to them, then perhaps Allah will also give us some of these gifts, or aspects of these gifts. You look at Bayezid Bustami, rahmatullah, great saint, who was born 40 years after the passing of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. The way he attained his level of spirituality was that he served when he was a child. He took care, made sure that the women of the household of the Prophet were taken care of, as far as making sure they had water, whatever. He would do whatever he had to do. This is when he was a young boy. And so he's given these gifts to such an extent that when Junaid Baghdadi rahmatullah is asked about him, and even though Junaid, so if you look at Bayezid Bustami rahmatullah, he's from, as far as the spiritual lineages, he's from the Naqshbandi silsila. Junaid Baghdadi is the forefather of the Qadriya silsila. So when Junaid Baghdadi is asked about Bayezid Bustami, he answers, he says that the position of Bayezid amongst the Sufi, amongst those that are spiritually enlightened, is like the position of Jibril or Gabriel amongst the angels. all because of his connection to that household. But this also, getting back to that point that I'd made, that those who have, Prophet ﷺ said to Ali, rather, that only a believer will love you and only a hypocrite will have animosity against you. That question, why him? Why not us? So we see this, and the first one to really ask that question was Satan himself. So when we look at Satan, Satan was not always Satan. Satan, before becoming Satan, before was Iblis, and before becoming Iblis was Azazel. So that was his name. He was from amongst the jinn. So you have like three major creations. You have like mankind, so we're created from clay. You have the jinn, who are created from smokeless fire, and then you have the angels, who are created from light, from nur. Okay. The angels, from Islamic perspective, do not have the ability to disobey Allah. All they can do, whatever they are commanded to do, that is what they do. Which is also why they don't have very strong emotions either. The jinn are created from smokeless fire, but their nature is rebellious. They are given the power to control that nature, but most of them choose not to. We, of course, as Rasulullah told us, that we are born on the fitra, on the natural path, which is by nature Islam. Yet, it's our environment that over time, like from the time we're born, that environment makes us whatever we are. Yet we are also given the ability to reason and to think, so that we can look at that and analyze that and decide, okay, maybe this environment isn't taking me in the right direction. Maybe I need to go in a different direction. So Azazel, when he was Azazel, again, he's from amongst the jinn, he learned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded everyone to worship him. So he did not leave a place on the earth where he did not prostrate to Allah. And this, he's there for thousands of years doing this. And so in lieu of that, Fazl Jazai, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a reward or benefit in lieu of something. So in lieu of this worship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes him Iblis. So Iblis is from libas, which means he donned the cloak of the angels. So now he roams with the angels. Now, if you look at the basic word of jinn is, and like Jannah, these are words that mean something that we cannot see. It's interesting because, you look at the light spectrum itself, ultraviolet, infrared, they're there, we know they're there, but we can't see them. So there's so many other things that we can't see. We can't, feel or touch, and yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about the Satans or the jinn, he says that they see you from places you don't even know. So Shaitan, or Iblis, when he became Iblis, because of all of this worship he'd done, he's now he's allowed to roam with the angels. Not only to roam with the angels, he learns so much that he becomes the teacher of some of these angels. I mean, this is the status he is given, the honor that he is given. But then, in Surah Baqarah, we know where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, he says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. And remember when your Lord said to the angels that I am going to create a vice-chair on earth. So the angels, they asked, they said, are you going to create one who's going to cause mischief and bloodshed on the earth while we honor and sing your praises? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to them, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun, that you don't know what I know. Several interesting points to understand here. One is, how did they know that mankind is going to do mischief and bloodshed on the earth? Because there were previous creations on the earth before mankind is said, which mainly the jinn, who did the same exact thing, right? The other important point to note here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He did not deny what they said. Which means that He acknowledged what they are saying, that yes, they're going to cause mischief and bloodshed on the earth. Which if you look at what mankind is doing, what are we doing? But he responded by saying, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun, that you don't know what I know. And this is why when there are people, who do things like Imam Hussein al-Islam, when there are people who follow the messengers and do what they're supposed to do, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, did I not tell you that you don't know what I know? These are people who are willing to give up everything for their love of Allah and His messengers. Some of us. So, of course, when He creates Adam al-Islam, now He gives the order. And the verse in the Quran, it says that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when I blow my soul into him, then prostrate. So the order to the angels is to prostrate to Adam. Iblis is included in that order because he's amongst the angels. Not that he is an angel. It's like you can put a suit on a pig, it's still a pig. So, you put a suit on, you put this dress on Iblis, he's still a jinn. But because he's amongst the angels, he's included in the order. And he understands this point. But his issue is, I did all of this for so many thousands of years. Adam hasn't even taken, he's just taken his first breath. He hasn't even praised Allah once. He's done nothing. Why him and not me? And so, part of this is mentioned in Surah Araf, which is Surah number 7. And if you start with verse number 11, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'm just going to go through the translation here for time. It is we who created you and gave you shape. Then we bade the angels prostrate to Adam, and they prostrated, not so Iblis. And it says, Lam yakum min as-sajidin. He is not of those who prostrate. Which is interesting because he prostrated all his life to Allah. And then Allah says, because he's refusing this one prostration, he says he's not of those who prostrate. All right. Allah said, Allah says to Iblis, He said, what prevented thee from prostrating when I commanded thee? He said, I am better than him. The arrogance. One is he disobeys, and not only does he disobey, he's going to justify his disobedience and his arrogance. I am better than him. You created me from fire, and you created him from clay. So his reasoning is fire rises and clay falls. Okay. So Allah says to him, get ye down from here. It is not for thee to be arrogant here. Get out, and thou art the lowest of creatures. He said, give me respite till the day that they are raised up. So Allah says, you are amongst those who are given respite. So again, all authority is for Allah, but when He gives someone authority, then we can't deny it. So He gives Shaitan, He says, fine, I give you respite. And then Shaitan, he says, because you have misguided me. And this is common, especially these days. No one takes responsibility for anything. It's always somebody else's fault. This is from Shaitan himself. He says, because you have misguided me. You hear in the translation, even though it's not really, he says, because thou hast thrown me out. But if the actual wording is because you have misguided me. I will lie in wait for them on the straight way. So he knows on Sirat al-Mustaqim. So he knows where to go. It's like when you go deer hunting, you look for the path that the deer are following. That's the path you sit on. So Shaitan, he knows the path he needs to be on. I will lie in wait for them on the straight way. And then he says, Then will I assault them from in front of them, from behind them, from their right and from their left. So basically 360 degrees. But he doesn't say above or below. So if we humble ourselves before our Lord, and we ask our Lord for help with sincerity, and we ask him properly, then Shaitan has no authority over us. Because also in other places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that all he can do is waswasa. All he can do is whisper. And also in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions where when he whispers or he does this waswasa, kind of this advice he gives, and someone obeys his advice, then he runs away and he says, Inni akhafu Allah Rabbul Alameen, that I fear Allah, the Lord of the worlds. So even today, he still believes in Allah. He still, claims to be worshiping Allah, but he does not honor the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said to honor. And then in the end he says what? He says, after he says that I will approach them from this, he says, وَلَا تَجِدْ أَكْثَرَهُمْ شَاكِرِينَ, and you will not find most of them grateful. And the important point to understand here is, he doesn't say that you will find most of them ungrateful. He says you will not find most of them grateful. So if he can take us away from being grateful, because there's grateful, there's indifferent, and then there's ungrateful. So even if we're indifferent, which means we're not grateful, then Shaitan has won. So that's why we should be very grateful for the gifts of Allah, for the favors of Allah. And of course the greatest favor that Allah has given us is his beloved messenger, his beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so if we're not grateful for that, even if we're indifferent to that, again Shaitan has won. And then he says, Allah says to him, he says, get out from this despised and expelled. If any of them follow thee, hell will I fill with them all. And then he says, oh Adam, dwell thou and thy wife, and I won't get into more of this at the moment. But here, again, there are several aspects that we need to understand here. Is, again, that the righteous believer who has with him the knowledge of the book and upholds that knowledge, then he, in reality, has more power than the jinn. It's also interesting, like when Sulaiman al-Islam, when he passed away, Sulaiman al-Islam passed away while he was in prayer, standing with his staff. And he used the jinn for them to build Masjid al-Aqsa. This is why when you look there, you see all these huge boulders in the foundation that the people should not have been able to move, because the jinn were the one who were doing all this work. Which may be perhaps what happened somewhat in Egypt and other places, where other people are having control over certain things and gaining control, and that gets into a different aspect of these things, where there are those who they think they have control to use them for evil purposes, but usually it's the other way around. And so like with Pharaoh, he said, I'm the Lord Most High. And he built all of these structures. The other thing though there also is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he talks about Haman, and he talks about Haman as the wazir of Pharaoh. There is mention of a Haman in the Bible, but the Haman in the Bible is the Persian wazir. So for those who say, the Prophet ﷺ, he plagiarized from the Bible, well, if he plagiarized from the Bible, when he's talking about Haman, why is he talking about someone in Persia? And that name Haman didn't come up in the hieroglyphics until recently. Also, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, hieroglyphics had been dead for 300 years. There was no one who knew how to read hieroglyphics 300 years before the Prophet ﷺ. They didn't learn how to read hieroglyphics until recently, when they found the Rosetta Stone at the end of the 1800s. And then they deciphered it and said, oh, this is how you read this. But Haman is mentioned in the hieroglyphics as the wazir, and not only as a wazir, as the stone, as the main stone mason, because in the Quran, Pharaoh tells Haman to fire up, to light up the fires, the fires of the, I'm blanking on the term right now. The kilns for these bricks. Thanks. So Sulaiman al-Islam, he's making prayer with his staff, and the jinn, they see him praying, so they continue to build. The thing was that the people had said, oh, they have the knowledge of the unseen. Sulaiman al-Islam's already passed. Until the termites ate the staff and then he falls, then the jinn realized, oh, we can go. So if they had the knowledge of the unseen, they would have gone before. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did this so that the people could understand, look, you're attributing too much authority to them. Again, to deny the authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, to deny the authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given is also disbelief. But when you start assigning authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given, that can lead to disbelief. So you have to have that balance. I'll sort of end here. Any questions?
Sulaiman al-Islam, he built the Masjid al-Aqsa?
Yes. Yeah, that's why it's also termed as the Solomon Temple. So Sulaiman al-Islam, well, rather, let me put it this way. He rebuilt it.
I see.
So the first house built on the earth for the worship of Allah is the Kaaba, whose foundations were actually laid by Adam al-Islam. And then he went, and then he laid the foundations for Masjid al-Aqsa. During the flood of Nuh al-Islam, these structures were all washed away. So Ibrahim al-Islam rebuilt the Kaaba, and he rebuilt part of Masjid al-Aqsa, which was basically like a tent. But this is why in the Quran, when you read where Ibrahim al-Islam, two places, one place when he's ordered to leave his wife Hajra and Ismail al-Islam there, when he's leaving, he says to Allah, he says, I'm leaving my offspring next to your house. But there's no structure there. Okay? So if there wasn't anything there, then why is he saying, I'm leaving them next to your house? The other aspect of that also is when he's ordered to build the Kaaba, he's not ordered to build the Kaaba. He's ordered to raise the foundations. So that means the foundations are already there. He just needs to raise them. Okay? So that means it's there before him. Because there are people who argue with that. No, Ibrahim al-Islam is the one who built it. He's the first one who built it, and that's, again, why is that wording used? It's specifically used to make you understand that. But people, yeah, how people are. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. So we'll end here today, inshallah. We'll pick up with Imam Ali Naqi next week, and I'll probably combine more of him with his son Imam Hassan Askari next week, and we'll go from there. So we'll make salat, but if there are no other questions. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and may He give protection and strength to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and wherever the people are being oppressed over their oppressors. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, the battery died.